thanks everybody for making time for this. I'm excited by the panel we've got together today, because what I'd really like to do is to explore what we now know after the last sort of 15, 20 years of effort. What do we now know about how to make sure that local communities benefit from the tourism that takes place around them? And we've got people from South Africa, from the Gambia, and from Kerala in India, all of whom have been engaged in trying to find solutions to that problem. But I thought, Adam, if you could just switch your microphone on, that we would start with your experience in the Gambia, because we worked some time ago on trying to improve the incomes that guides and craft workers, and then you went on to work with some agricultural producers. And it'd be just useful to hear from you briefly what your experience of doing that was before we move.
Yeah, that was actually in 2000 when we were actually looking at the history. The background of that is, before we started the project, there was really aggressive competition between the small players. Like the taxi drivers will hate the guides for taking tourists somewhere without using their services. And the craft market also will hate the taxi drivers for actually taking tourists out of their area but into other areas. So there was a lot of contradiction between the small players. And apart from that, the formal sector did not have any of it, because they didn't want the small businesses to take over some of their businesses, like the juice presses who were just outside the gates of the hotel. And the tour operators will not like the guides also to take, because the guides are really effective. They know the country better than the bigger tour operators. And the tour operators have seen that the guides are taking out business from them. So we had this task. Actually, when Harold was here, in 1 year, they were actually, some of them were physically fighting each other. So we thought that needs to be dealt with. So we applied for funding through, we were successful to get DFID to support us. And it was mainly looking at market access for small players. So what we did was to put together all the small players. What we have in the Gambia is clusters. So you have a Senegambia cluster where you have the bigger hotels, then you have all the other smaller players like the juice presses, the craft vendors, the taxi drivers, the guides, all within that location. And it was government's obligation to actually provide them with infrastructure so that they're around these hotels. So what we did first was to actually do a baseline study to know what their income level are first. And then we moved on to implement the project by setting up a responsible tourism partnership, where we brought all the players. And the smaller players were not organized then. They were all working individually, but we managed through the Association of Small Scale Enterprises to bring them together. And they started negotiating directly as one voice with the bigger players. So we had the Responsible Tourism Partnership, where for the first time we have managed to bring tour operators, international tour operators, to sit down around the table with hoteliers, with restaurant owners, all the other associations, because we have 3 major associations apart from the tour operators. What we have is the Gambia Hotel Association. Then we have the Travel and Tourism Association, which is mainly travel agents who are linked to the tour operators. And then we had ASET, now called ASET. ASET is the Association of Small Scale Enterprises in Tourism. Now, all these players, and as I said, for the first time, we managed to get APTA, and I think it's the independent travelers, mainly in UK, because over 50% of our tourists normally come from the United Kingdom. Through their federation, we managed to get them to be represented around the table so that we can look at ways and means of getting the informal sector to participate. Now, we managed to convince them because we said tourists, when they come to the Gambia, are not just interested in being in a hotel all the time. And the operators had this trick of telling their guests that if they go out, they will be hassled. Of course, there is hassle, but they put it in such a way that many of the tourists are afraid of going out, and it's a de facto inclusive holiday they will have within the hotels, because of course they will be afraid of going out, where in reality we had young people who, because of how restrictive the industry is, are actually overdoing their profession by begging and hassling tourists. So we managed to tell them we can only stop this when those outside the gates of the hotel can get an income. Because otherwise what you do is you heighten the contradictions outside, and then what happens is everyone fails. And tourists do not want to stay within the walls of the hotel all the time. They want to experience real Gambia. So if you make it horrible for them to go out, they go home, they will say, I've not enjoyed my holiday. Everyone knows everyone is coming from a home. So it's not the hotel that is the attraction. What is the attraction for many tourists is not to come to a hotel. The hotel is just an obvious factor. They must stay within a place, they must sleep there. What is interesting for them is to go out. And if you make it difficult for them to go out.
Adama, that's a great place to move on to James. But just before we do, we've actually been able to demonstrate that by using those kinds of methods and getting people to work together between the informal, well, within the informal sector and between the informal sector and the formal sector, it is possible to make a much better experience, both for the guest and to raise the incomes of the informal sector, which is what I'd like to come back to in the second part of this discussion. But James, can we come to you in Cape Town? Because you've done something similar in terms of improving the experience for the guests who come to visit Cape Town, but you've done it in a different way to the way that Adama has just described.
Yes, thank you, Harold, and greetings to all my colleagues around the world. Really, thank you for the opportunity to present Utandu. So, basically, Utandu is a Zulu or Xhosa word for love. And the name of the organization is Utandu South Africa. And essentially, we are a non-profit organization that is linking tourism with a very broad range of community development projects and social entrepreneurs here in Cape Town. And the idea was really to tap into the resources of the tourism industry to support a broad range of community projects. So there's basically two main elements to what we're doing. As a non-profit organization, we are making it very easy for tour operators, tourism stakeholders like travel trade shows like We Are Africa. We are making it easy for those organizations to identify reputable, reliable, impactful community projects that they can support. The second major leg was really when we started Utandu 13 years ago, we didn't want to just go to the tourism industry and say, please support community projects. We wanted to say to those tour operators, many of whom are really passionate, they're sitting in their offices in New York, London, Paris, even Cape Town. We wanted to make it easy for their clients to go and visit those projects that they were supporting. And so the second major leg of Utandu is what we call a cultural philanthropic tour, where we take visitors into what, township areas. I don't really like the word township, but, communities that have been disadvantaged, particularly by our history. Take people to visit interesting, innovative, change-making community projects that are driven by really inspiring people. And the tours, I know, have really been successful in the authenticity of the experience. So, for example, you know, we would go and see children at a ballet school in the township, or we would walk around these extensive urban agricultural programs. And the experiences that a client or a visitor would have is absolutely authentic. They are really having an insight into the incredible work that people are doing, how they are building their communities. And through the tours, we are supporting these programs. But then if people wanted to donate, as a nonprofit organization, we would then make it easy to facilitate that.
James, thanks. So what we've got now are two different examples. One from the Gambia, where cooperation between the informal sector with the formal sector as well has increased what can be earned. You've done something slightly different, James. You've used the model of enabling people to have fantastic, authentic experiences, which inevitably encourages them to want to donate more. So those are two strategies, both of which demonstrably worked in two different places. But Glyn, can we come now to you and what you've done with TFPD? If you could give us the short version of what you've achieved, that would be fantastic.
Harold, I'm not sure that there is a short version, but I'll give it my best shot. Just to describe TFPD, we are a company that has the sort of mantra of working with communities, partnering with communities to commercialize their tourism assets. So we operate as a social enterprise, but with a very definite for-profit objective. And it's for a very simple reason. If we don't make a profit, then the communities don't make a profit. And what we do is we manage community-owned lodges in different parts of South Africa. We're in the Kgalagadi Transfrontier Park. We are in the Great Limpopo Transfrontier Park, and we're in the Drakensberg, Maloti Drakensberg Transfrontier Park. So those are three major transfrontier conservation areas within Southern Africa. And we have lodges and or camps in those areas. In total, on any given night, we have 300 bed nights that we have to fill, which, as you can imagine, under the current COVID situation, is a major challenge in our lives. But somehow we've managed to get through, and it's been done with it again in partnership with our people, our staff, and our stakeholders by engaging with them.
Just to be clear for other people's benefit, the communities actually own these lodges, don't they?
They do indeed.
So they are the primary stakeholders, and they're the primary beneficiaries when there's profit.
In fact, the communities own everything. We own a piece of paper called an agreement, and that's the sum total of what we own. And that's part of the challenge, and it's also part of the original structure of what we do, and part of an ongoing dialogue with various players, government, NGOs and others, on how to actually make all of these come together and work. Because very often, and that's part of the problem, is that you have organizations that provide funding, and something starts and then the funding runs out and then it fails. On the other hand, if you don't start with funding for some of these remote rural areas, you'll never have anything. And in the Kgalagadi, our lodge there, Klaas Lodge, from which I just returned a couple of days ago, is a perfect example of a place that was built. Its address is Dune 91 off the Awab River Road, Kgalagadi Transfrontier Park. It is 30 kilometers from the nearest gravel road through the sort of swathes of sand dunes that are in that area. And to reach it is a mission of its own. And the lodge was built there and whether due consideration was given to how you would get tourists there, that's a different matter. But had it not been built with support funding from government, no one would ever have built a lodge there. Having been built there and having worked at developing it and developing a market for it, it now has become a self-sustaining operation. And I think that for me is a key objective of how we operate, is to take something that's...
Glenn, remind me, Klaus is owned by which communities?
It's owned by two communities, the Kumani San, a Bushman community, and the Meer community, who are a mixed race community that live in the area around Rietfontein, Belkom, and Hardepeers. So they were the recipients of a land claim back in the year 2000, and I think, in fact, I think it started in 2000. I think it was concluded in 2002. And there's a well-known comment by the then head of the Bushman community, whose name was Opa Rechopstaan Kruiper. And for people who understand Afrikaans, it's a complete contradiction in terms, because Rechopstaan means stand upright and Kruiper means crawler. And there's a whole story behind the history of his name. But he commented at the time of the settlement of the land claim, and Salafo, you possibly were around at that time, and he commented at that time that the land has been given, but the rains have not come. And what he was saying is, it's all very well to be given this land, but what are we going to do with it? How are we going to make it work? And I think that's really what we've set about doing. It's been a long and arduous task. It's very difficult to persuade people that it can actually take 8 to 10 years before you reach break even, and that those operating losses that you incur have to be funded from somewhere. And to do that, you have to have partners that are able to support you in what you're trying to do, because it's not a normal commercial enterprise. It's not something you can go to a traditional bank with that say, we'd like to borrow money and here's our business plan, and by the way, we'll be able to pay you back in 3 years and you can add as much interest as you like and it'll work. It doesn't work like that. But if it had not got the support, it would not be there today. And I think that's the message for me that is such an important message about how do you talk about how do we develop community tourism. What I'm saying about Cast Lodge is true of probably 80%, if not more, of the places in which community tourism operates, both in South Africa and elsewhere in not just Africa, but in other developing countries, because often the communities reside in areas and have access to areas that have these amazing beauty, this amazing access to cultural resources and things like that. But issues of accessibility, infrastructure support just don't exist in those areas.
Glenn, thanks very much. I want to go to Rupesh, because in a way, Rupesh, you have exactly the opposite problem in Kerala, don't you? I mean, Glenn has a problem where, frankly, if Glenn didn't organise them, the tourists wouldn't go there. You had a problem in Kerala where the tourists were turning up and arriving in people's villages, but the local communities weren't benefiting at all. Only the hotel and lodge owners were benefiting. So the solutions you came up with were similar, but for a different reason. Do you want to just tell us something about what the Responsible Tourism Mission has done in Kerala?
Yeah, good evening to all of you. I'm so happy to be part of this panel, because various activists, academicians, and practitioners are participating in this panel. I am coming from the different sector of the organization. I'm working with the Government of Kerala Department of Tourism for promoting responsible tourism in Kerala. I am the State Responsible Tourism Mission Coordinator of Department of Tourism. We started responsible tourism initiative in 2008. We selected 4 pilot destinations: Kumaragam, Thekadi, Kovalam, and Vaitiri. that was the first phase. Now, later it is expanded to 3 other destinations, and now it is expanded to all over Kerala. So before starting responsible tourism initiative, actually, there were some conflicts in various parts of Kerala, in various tourism destinations, in between the local community and tourism industry. Actually, we started the responsible tourism initiative in Kerala to address the concerns raised by the local community. So, from my experience, local communities will have serious level expectations and hopes about tourism development. But when the tourism industry will emerge in a destination, probably industry partners are not ready to consider the local community's feeling. So if we are entering as an entrepreneur or a tourist, we are entering the privacy of the local community or host community. So we need to address the feelings of the local community and the concerns of the local community. But before starting responsible tourism in Kerala, there were no serious level interventions to address the concerns raised by the local community. For example, when we started responsible tourism activities in Kumaragam was one of the first pilot destination in Kerala for implementing responsible tourism. There were serious level of conflicts in between tourism industry and community. I was also the part of some movements or some agitations against unethical and unscientific development of tourism. So government decided to start responsible tourism initiative in selected destinations to address the concerns raised by the local community. At first, we conducted various field studies to find out the realities of the issues raised by the local community. Then we find out that industry was not ready, or tourism stakeholders was not ready to purchase any local products from the locality. At the same time, local community had no job opportunities in tourism before starting responsible tourism in these select destinations of Kerala. So we tried to find out some solutions that at first we started some vegetable cultivation with the support of our women self-help groups. We have serious women, very good women self-help groups in Kerala, which is called Kudumbasri. And at first we started vegetable cultivation and some types of fruit productions and milk production, etc. And we tried to create linkage with tourism industry with formal agreements under the leadership of local panchayat. Panchayat means the local self-government governments. We have serious 3-tier system of panchayat raj, local self-governments, and local panchayat or village panchayat are so strong in Kerala. So we approached the panchayat under the leadership of Department of Tourism and Panchayat, and we made agreement with the hotels and resorts, and we started supply of local producers to the hotels and resorts. It was the part of our economic responsibility part. Actually, all of you know that because Dr. Harold is moderating this session. Dr. Harold Goodwin always supported us to promote serious level responsible tourism initiatives in Kerala, and he supported very well. He gave us guidance. Under the guidance of Dr. Harold, we made agreements with the tourism industry for the purchase of local goods and services. And later it is expanded to socio-cultural responsibility. At first, on 2009, we tried to find out community-based tourism products from the locality. That means it was the process of tourism resource mapping. Actually, I was the consultant from the beginning, and I was the coordinator of that destination for implementing responsible tourism in destinations. So we tried to find out traditional livelihood activities, and we tried to convert them as community-based tourism products. Then we made a beautiful, one of the unique community-based tourism product, tourism package. Its name is Village Life Experience Package. As part of this initiative, the guests will have the chance to experience traditional livelihood activities like coir making, coconut tree climbing, chodi tapping, fishing activities, agriculture activities, and our marketing strategies. You can take selfies from the top of a coconut tree. If you are ready to visit Kumaragam, you will have the chance to take a selfie from the top of a coconut tree, and the farmer will get money from that process. That's the way of approach to include local community in tourism. That means we are focusing on community-based tourism activities for promoting experiential tourism packages. Now we have 140 experiential tour packages in various parts of Kerala. We have 20,000 units in various parts of Kerala. 85% of the units are leading by women or managing by the women. That means Kerala Responsible Tourism Mission activities are one of the model of women empowerment through tourism.
Rupesh, can I just pick it up here and just summarize for the benefit of people who are watching and listening to this? What we've heard really are 4 different examples of using tourism to empower local communities, both economically and in terms of their status, by enabling the tourists to communicate with those local people in a way which is respectful and provides additional income. Glyn's example also includes some direct employment within the lodge for local people, but most of the benefits are coming through additional sales. The other thing which I want to turn now to you, Salafu, if we can, is to look at the things which Adam has talked about with the producer groups. Glyn does some of this with I know what goes on in TFPD. And Rupesh, it's been a very important part of your work as well. The bringing together of independent small scale producers and enabling them to sell to bigger units than would otherwise be prepared to trade with them. And I know, Salafu, that's one of the things that you've been doing through your SME Trade Links project. But do you want to just pick it up from there, and then we'll come back and go around again? Rupesh, sorry, Salafu, you're on mute. Great, go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much, Harold, and good evening, fellow panelists. This indeed is a very good place for me to come in terms of what SME Trade Links as an organization does. We basically work with large corporate tourism entities and entities that intervene in the tourism sector to assist small tourism businesses who are trying to come into the industry. And our work is grounded in government legislation in this country. In terms of Goodwin and some of my fellow South Africans would probably be, you are aware of the BEE legislation, Black Economic Empowerment legislation, which is an official government policy which have 5 elements. One of the elements has direct implication to tourism, to small business development, and it is what we call enterprise and supply development. Now, what the legislation says essentially is that large corporates in this country, and large corporate is defined as any company that makes more than 50 million rand in annual turnover. And such entities are required to invest 3% of their after-tax profits to develop small businesses in their value chains. So that's the policy, and that's the point of departure. We have taken that policy and we are applying it to the tourism sector, where we have developed a platform that is called SME Trade Links. It's on the website, on Facebook, and so on and so forth. And we basically go to large corporates and get a portion, either the entire amount of that 1% profit after tax or a portion thereof. And we identify small businesses that are either already in the value chain that particular corporate, or that have the potential of becoming members of providing services to that corporation. We take that amount of money and we develop enterprise development or supplier development programs. And these programs could be mentorships, these programs could be skills training, these programs could be facilitating linkages to the market, the access to market issue that Adamo was talking about earlier, facilitating procurement processes by, say, for instance, identifying young agricultural, young agri-entrepreneurs who could be able to supply vegetables to the corporate that is paying us to do this kind of work. And my work is, in fact, a continuation of what we used to do in the Tourism Enterprise Partnership, which was established in 2000, and which has demonstrated the importance or the value add of having platforms that are dedicated to facilitating linkages between small businesses and large corporates, because it has always been the missing link in the tourism development. And through SME Trade Links, we are trying to address that particular gap. And I must indicate that we have achieved quite some success in terms of the corporates that we deal with, in the sense that we allow them to comply with the legislation. And by complying, they're also helping young entrepreneurs come into the sector. So in a nutshell, that's essentially what we do as SME Trade Links. And I can see how my work or our work has links to everything that my 4 other colleagues have been doing. And this is definitely something.
Sorry to interrupt. Can I just push you a bit?
Yes.
Because I mean, it seems to me you have the advantage that you have access to resources which comes from the legislation from those large corporates. And I don't know actually of anywhere else in the world where that's the case. So we just put that on one side for a minute in terms of the business case. To what extent are those corporates recognizing that there is value in the authenticity? I mean, South Africa has an extraordinary ethnic diversity. The Gambia has actually got more per head of population than you have, before Adam chips in and just points that out. But the truth is that South Africa has enormous ethnic diversity, and yet you don't actually, it's quite difficult to get to meet those different groups and to experience their cultures. And it seems to me, I'm not clear that the corporates see value in that, but they don't see the value in that quite remarkable ethnic diversity. And Glenn, I'll come to you when we've heard from Saliful on this. It does seem to me that that's an under-recognized tourism resource in South Africa, or have I got that wrong?
I suppose, Harold, it is an argument that can be made that the potential of tourism, although recognized, the potential has been recognized. For all intent and purposes, the potential has been recognized. Now, do we have the right policies or the right tools on the ground to realize that potential? Certainly, there's a lot of work to be done in that particular area. But the other point as well, corporates who are coming behind these kind of initiatives, you have to identify, you have to take into consideration that they're doing it, a lot of them are doing it to comply with government legislation, because there's a stick to non-compliance. And quite frankly, you'd rather go with the carrot than the stick, which would basically cut you out from government procurement processes if you don't comply with these BE elements. There's that aspect. But to be honest, there are also companies that have recognized that there's the real strategy behind using the BE legislation to achieve tourism development. And they are doing it. If you talk to companies like South African national parks, for instance, and the work that they're doing out of Kruger National Park in terms of the communities that are outside the park, how they are slowly but surely organizing them into producing cooperatives that these lodges can basically get their produce from.
So I think that's a good point to go to Glyn. Glyn, what's been your experience? Because you work a lot on the edges of sand parks. You're muted, so put yourself back on. What's been your experience, Glyn?
Well, I think that just listening to what Salafo has been saying, I think he and I need to have a very in-depth discussion offline, because I can think of a number of ways in which you can turn the carrot and the stick into a carrot for corporates. I mean, to me, just an example is that in Limpopo, we have probably Limpopo province, one of the most amazing cultural diversities that exists in this country, and the art and crafts are of the most amazing international standard. And yet the crafters battle. Now, for me, just one little thing, if every government department in Limpopo was told that they had to put into their budget 250,000 Rand a year to buy crafts from the local crafters, to curate them in their offices and circulate them through their offices, they would keep a thriving industry, or crafters turn them into a thriving industry. Instead of which, the crafters live really on the sort of bones. So that's just one example, and you could take that into corporate South Africa, where people could be proud of the displays they have, rather than that they've gone into one of our supermarket chains or whatever chains and bought half a dozen prints on a framed prints because they need pictures on their walls in their offices. So it's that kind of initiative that one needs to look at. You know, from us, and maybe a bit later I'll talk about Vitsisok as some of the examples, but for us, Chaos Lodge is, I think, a perfect example of something that we've done and resisted the temptation to do otherwise. And that is that we were encouraged at one point when the lodge was battling, we were struggling to get our turnover up, we were higher priced than the Sandparks product. And one of the officials came to me and said, why don't you turn your place into a sort of self-catering type place? Well, the reason is we've got 30 families who live from their incomes. They in turn support 250 people as a consequence of earning an income from the lodge, versus the 4 or 5 people we would have employed if we turned it into a self-catering operation.
Good, that's the absolute example of what we're talking about, isn't it? It's that opportunity to grow the cake by the way you run the business. Exactly. Now that's happened around TFPD, and it's happened around some other projects in South Africa. And Adama, in the Gambia, if we could just come back to you briefly, that was what we were about with the Gambia initiative, wasn't it? You need to put your microphone on, Adama. But I think we may have lost Adama. I think he's frozen. James, can I come to you? Because you've done something similar, but in a different way, in the sense that you've taken people to see these stunning things and encourage them to contribute to them.
Yes. So, I mean, the diversity of community projects that we are working with, you know, covers sectors from urban agriculture, youth development, early childhood centers, skills development, unemployment, developing people who are unemployed. And the idea is that we expose these community projects to mostly foreign visitors, actually. You know, the vast majority.
That's what I wanted to pursue you about, James. You walked right into my trap. I mean, the question for me, we understand why the international visitor is keen to see these things, but the big issue, really, and it must have been very obvious this year during COVID, is really what does the domestic tourist and the resident in South Africa, what do they see as the value of these other cultures?
Sure, that's a difficult question to answer.
Difficult, or you don't want to answer it, James?
So, I mean, I think local South Africans in suburbs, historically, there's a real reticence about going into townships. Maybe there's an historical fear about going into townships, which foreigners don't have. And I suppose, when we speak to our clients who come from all around the world, but let's say, for example, the United States, when people come out on tour with us, they very often will say, that they don't actually go and visit communities on the outskirts of their cities, but because they're on holiday, it's exotic. There's a greater kind of interest. They're out of their comfort zone and they don't have any historical context to those communities. And it's quite interesting, actually. Just yesterday, we're coming up to our end of our financial year, and looking at particularly this last year, the vast majority of support that we received came from international donors.
Kerala, Rupesh, we just come back to you briefly. I'll come to you in a second, Nadima, to go back to that conversation. But Rupesh, I know that Kerala has had a difficult time with COVID, but you've been really successful in generating domestic tourism in Kerala, haven't you? With people coming in both from other parts of Kerala. It's been a big move for people to rediscover Kerala during the COVID pandemic, and you've had people coming in from other parts of India. Have they come in and appreciated the very distinctive cultures of Kerala? Has that gone well?
So actually, yeah. Actually, the situation is same as compared to other part of the world in Kerala also. Now Kerala Tourism and Responsible Tourism, especially Responsible Tourism Mission, is trying to market domestic tourism very well, trying to attract domestic tourists very well to our destinations. Very recently, Kerala RT Mission declared a package named Experience Kerala with Your Family for the Keralites. It's a different package with some serious level discounts also included, along with our partnering hotels and resorts, homestays, farm stays, tent accommodations, etc. We have more than 450 homestays, around 400 farm stays, service villas, grihasthalis, etc., along with 10 camps also. So we are trying to promote domestic tourism, village tourism activities, rural tourism activities to address the issues based on faced on COVID, created by the COVID pandemic. At the same time, we have for online platforms, we are promoting our art and craft products through that platforms, not only for the tourists, especially for the whole Keralites and national people also. We have Art and Cultural Forum to promote our artists and craftsmen to sell, to showcase their products, their cultural activities, etc., through these platforms. Through that way also we can promote, we are trying to promote learning experience packages. That means we cannot find out serious level international travel very near future. So we are trying to promote learning experiences packages to expand the length of stay of the tourist, those who are interested to visit Kerala, even though domestic tours are also there. So we already declared cuisine learning experience packages. We have a strong network of around 3,000 homes. They are registered under Responsible Tourism Mission after the training, and through that homes or homesteads, this will have the chance to experience traditional ethnic cuisine And now we converted them as learning experience package for cuisine learning experience. It will be 15 days to 30 days. At the same time, we have martial experience packages. We have culinary units, martial arts units, etc. All of them are connected to learning experience packages, and guests will have the chance to learn such types of art, craft, cuisine, and other farming activities, etc., as part of learning experiences. So we are trying to promote the length of stay of the domestic tourist through learning experiences, packages, and experience Kerala with your family. That is our strategy now.
Thanks, Rupesh. Adama, can we come back to your situation in the Gambia? Because it seems to me that you're the only person on this panel who comes from a really quite small country with very little domestic tourism. And although you've got remarkable ethnic diversity for such a small country, those ethnic groups mix a lot together anyway. So there isn't the sense that you can go to, as I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, but there isn't the sense that you might go to a different village to meet with a different community, because you already probably have connections with those people. So it's not quite as exotic as it might be if you travel from one part of South Africa to another, for example. Is that so? Things for you have been particularly difficult, haven't they, through COVID?
Really difficult. Is tourism is almost dead here, and that's deliberate. Really, it's government policy. We have now opened, we closed the borders some months ago, but we've now opened the borders. But it's so restrictive that we can't have tourists coming, because even if you come to the Gambia at your own expense, you are again put in a hotel and you are tested and you got to wait for the result. The argument being you can actually contact the virus whilst on the plane. Because it's a small country, we can easily be wiped out. It's the smallest country in mainland Africa with only 2 million people. So the government is really very strict when it comes to COVID. I mean, it has paid dividend because it's not as serious as it is in other countries. It is coming up now because now we do have 10, 15 cases a day, but the number of deaths is really down to possibly one person in a week or so. So that's good. But in terms of tourism, no, there are no tourists coming to this country at this stage. Is really devastating for small businesses who rely mainly on tourism for their earnings, because over the years agriculture we're an agrarian country, but agriculture was neglected just because in '85 we had a serious issue when government invested a lot in infrastructure and all that to attract tourists, and that burden went high, and the IMF came in, and then we have happened in a lot of African countries. We had the economic recovery program, which actually brought in prescriptions as to how our economy must be managed. And one of the prescriptions was, of course, you can't subsidize the farmers anymore. And if you have farmers and the government is not subsidizing them, then the end result is they cannot produce as much. So we became more and more dependent on tourism because of that. But again, tourism is becoming a risky business, because coming out from Ebola, coming out from Thomas Cook collapse, now we have COVID. I mean, all that put together, it's really knocking the economy of this country very badly.
Adama, that brings me to something I wanted to. We've got about 5 minutes left, so it's really in a way the last thing we're going to discuss. But it seems to me that I know in the Gambia, Adama, the practices that you've been engaged in have always been about finding additional livelihoods for people who are already trying to make a living from tourism. It's always been about additional. in your case, James, you've been working really hard at bringing resources to groups which already exist by connecting them with tourism in one way or another, but it's been existing people. And Glyn, in your case, you have created some direct employment through the lodges, but a lot of it has been through your supply chain for food, for soft furnishings, for the making of furniture, the making of pots and so on. So a lot of it has come through the supply chain. And similarly, Rupesh, you've worked a lot with people who've already got a way of making a living to try and get them some additional monies by enabling them to engage with tourism. So you haven't, I would argue that none of you have increased dependency on tourism. You've rather tried to use tourism money to enhance livelihoods, but not to replace. And Rupesh, when you think of that census that you and I did of the impact of tourism on Kumarakoram, we found that most households made something from tourism, but they also had other sources of income, so they weren't dependent. And I think that's true in the Gambia too, Adam, at the household level. There are only a relatively few are totally dependent. But how important, just as we come to the end of this, how important do you think it is that tourism is seen as an additional source of income at the household level and not the sole source of income?
I mean, our position is to make sure that people have to change their mindset and not to believe that tourism is the one that lays the golden egg all the time and keep on actually doing what they have been doing before. If you are agrarian or if you're in agriculture, you must make sure that you do it well. And then if we can have tourism as an added value, that's better. So we have been trying to use tourism in a way that it supplements the income of people rather than it becomes the mainstay of their economic activity. And that's why we are getting more into activities now than letting communities build their community-based tourism by building lodges and all that. We've done that in the past, but it's been very disastrous for a lot of communities. So we're trying to change that mindset by telling people that's not the best way you should do it. I mean, what you should do is tourists can enjoy the cultural activities you have. And it's not all about building a camp because your neighbor is building a camp, but it's all the time looking at those elements, those resources that they have, whether be it culture or whether be it fishing or be it other things that they can utilize that can attract tourists to their areas, which is more useful for their development than starting other things.
Sorry to cut you off. Can I just quickly go around the rest of you to get your take on this? Salafu, you need to switch your mic on. What's your take on this, Salafu?
Well, again, Harold, I think it really depends on the policy that perhaps the country and the industry is trying to push. And I don't think that my colleagues would disagree with me if I say that in South Africa, we are really trying our very best to push tourism entrepreneurship in the true sense of the word, in the sense that we know what tourism can do. We know what kind of industry tourism is, and we know that it has the potential of creating jobs. It has the potential of adding to the GDP, but it also needs to be perhaps professionalized and move a little bit away from the informality. As SME Trade Links, we certainly have been pushing that message, and everything that we do in terms of our skills programs, our mentorship programs, our access to finance programs, our access to market programs is really to make sure that that our enterprises, our beneficiaries, are actually sustainable. That they're able to build enterprises that create jobs, that generate income for their employees and for themselves. And also we have a varied tourism sector in the sense that sometimes it is only your own creativity that limits what you can achieve in the industry. So yes, indeed, not everyone has to build a lodge, not everyone has to build a hotel, not everyone has to own wheels to participate in the tourism sector. But given our circumstances in South Africa, given the historical nature of the industry, I think pushing entrepreneurship from smaller entities, from smaller businesses is perhaps the way to go. And also, if I may take one more minute, Harold, just to add, and this goes back to the COVID situation that was discussed by Adama as well as Rupesh. I think the COVID situation has basically really, it's like the tide that has gone out, and now we see who has been swimming, naked. And it has shown us that our industry has to be structurally perhaps transformed to really rely on domestic tourism, because we do have the numbers domestically.
Yeah, you do. That's a big difference between you and the Gambia. Thanks, Salafu. Can I come to you, James, and then I'll come to Glyn, and we'll go for a final word to Rupesh. But James.
Yeah. So Harold, from our point of view, many of the community projects and social entrepreneurs had never dreamed of telling their story and generating funds through the tourism industry. So it was a real surprise that door could be open for them. And for many, it's been a pleasant surprise, very successfully done.
Thanks, James. Glyn, what's your take on this?
Well, I think what Salafu was saying is so apt. One thing for sure that we're not is, to use a good South Africanism, we're not in the shame, let's go and visit the poor community type tourism. We're about making sure that our communities can develop their products to be of a standard that can compete with any other product of a similar nature. And we target all of the lodges that we operate at a 3 or 4 star standard. Now, why that's important is because people who work in those environments learn skills, hospitality skills, that are not only limited to tourism, but skills that can be used in an admin environment in other businesses, skills that can be used in the restaurant industry, which isn't just totally dependent on tourism. And just to go back to the comment about domestic tourism, it is an irony, and I know it's in our probably lowest season for Castle Lodge, but we've had the best ever December at Castle Lodge this last December that we've ever had in its history. Yeah. And that's all from the South African market. Yeah. So was about pricing to a large extent. It was about those people who would otherwise have been skiing in wherever, Aspen or wherever they would have been, who were traveling in South Africa, people who wanted to get into the wide open spaces and be away from this dreadful disease. And I think as a last word, I just want to say that, yeah, I am forever the optimist. We've suffered a huge amount of stress and strain through this last 12 months. When anyone asks how we're getting on, I said we survived the last month end, and hopefully we'll survive the next month end, but we live from one month end to the next. But COVID will go and we will recover. And so you can't just throw out the baby with the bathwater. And that's one of the issues that we've had to focus on, is how to keep this industry alive. And yes, it will be a question of survival of the fittest. But to be quite frank, if you had asked me in April, May last year, where would we be today? I would never, ever have imagined that we would still be trading and still be surviving and still be going on. And it's just because, and that's part of the skills that people need to learn in any business, it's how to adapt. And we took our staff with us as partners in this journey. most of our staff are working 20% of the month, 25% of the month at the moment, and that's all they're getting paid for. But they are managing, but the most important thing is it's keeping their lodges open. And the lodges will be there when trading and tourism returns in great ways. And we focused on how can we increase our penetration of the domestic market.
Glenn, you're absolutely right. Resilience is a key issue going forward. Rupesh, you're going to have the last word, briefly.
Yeah, actually from the beginning, Responsible Tourism Mission tried to create awareness that tourism is not only the main income. So we need to identify or create our own other income sources. That means our units are always working with agricultural activities, craft, culture, and all other activities are always going on. So I think when I heard about the comments from the other panelists, probably Responsible Tourism Missions units are working very well when compared to other projects. We already started various types of storytelling audios, videos, and work at home videos. As Dr. Harold knows that we already won back the WTM award for meaningful connections. That majority of our units are working for attracting tourists in various types of activities from work at home videos. At the same time, we are, yes.
I'm going to interrupt you. One of the big changes in you since I first met you is you become a really good salesman. You become really absolutely brilliant at that elevator pitch of presenting just how wonderful Kerala is. And of course, you're right, Kerala is wonderful, but so is the Gambia, so is Limpopo, some of the townships in Cape Town. These are all wonderful places. I wanted to finish though just with one comment from me, because I've been fairly quiet, but by my normal standards. And that is that I wanted to have on this panel with you men a young woman from Rwanda called Tina Kigo, who is, I think, possibly the best entrepreneur I've ever met, based in a small village in Uganda, outside Bundi National Park. And I think sometimes, if I might just end with this, Salifu, I think sometimes the big corporates don't recognize just how brilliant some of those small entrepreneurs are. I think about the guys who come around the restaurants with their wire sculpture models in Cape Town particularly, and what they're doing, they appear to be trying to sell things to you, but they're not really. They're doing their market research to see how they need to adapt that model to make it sell better. And I think there's a lot to be learnt from those entrepreneurs who, in my view, are too often disregarded. But I know that none of you do that. It's been an absolute pleasure. I hope other people have found this as fascinating as I have. Thank you very much for making time to participate in this. And I'm looking forward, I hope, to engaging with all of you more in the coming few years.